So once again, we'll recap on that. We're going to determine the base of our object so we know where to start, right? If we just kind of blindly start, however, it's going to throw the entire thing off. Remember, we're trying to mimic this thing in its entirety, okay? So right now I've cut my piece in half, so I'm just going to need to take this space and basically double it, right? You can measure that out. I also have a number of these, what are these, compasses? It's called a compass. Compasses in the studio. I have, I think, like 4 of them. They're all in pretty rough shape, but they'll be able to get the job done for what we're doing. So what I'm basically going to do is first I'm going to lay out a little slab of clay, and then I'll either carve into this. Another way you could do it is just take a piece of paper and trace it out, and then transfer that onto a bit of clay, cut it out, and use it from there if you wanted to too as well. The first thing I'm going to do is actually take this measurement from here to here. Right? This is a wide-based pot, so it's going to be this length here, here to here. And then if I wanted to kind of just sketch out to see how that's going to be, everybody should know how to use one of these. So that's roughly going to be the base. And that seems perfect right there. See how we have that now? Now as I build this thing and I coil build it and I rotate it around, it's going to be some builder. And this is a wide base Ming vase, so that's how we're going to do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of get my slab going. Clay here. So depending on the foot, some of you, I'm not sure all of you, I can't remember all of your forms, but some people have like a more intricate foot or something like that. Maybe it's just like a little, and then it kind of moves up. It has some sort of ornamentation or something along the foot. You're going to need to determine how you want to do that. Do you want this slab that we lay down to be the foot in its entirety? Do you want the first coil to actually be the one that makes that little bit of ornamentation? So you're going to have to kind of play through your design a little bit. I always recommend, like, if you do have a small foot, like a small little bump or something like that going on, to lay down the slab and let the slab be that part, okay? So I'm just going to go ahead and rip off a little bit of clay. I don't know how well this is going to actually look like. We'll start with this. Okay. I want to keep this foot slightly a bit thicker, maybe some of the slabs that you guys were working with. That way, if I want to flip it over and carve into it or do something like that, I was generous enough with the material to keep that. Just rolling a simple slab out. You all can use you have your kind of rolling pin, you have all that stuff to make it nice and even. See a knife over there in those tools anywhere? Or Lauren, would you be able to run and grab me just like a little knife of some sort? The tools area, right behind where you're sitting. There's like a bunch of tools there. Okay. Sweet. Now I've got this nice little slab. Little pizza. And we have banding wheels inside. You don't have to work on a banding wheel. We only have, I think, 9 banding wheels total. So you're going to need to either get one and use one, but I want everybody to be returning them when they're done with them for the end of the day. This is mine from the studio, so a banding wheel is basically something I can kind of turn this around. I can build, and as I'm building, I can keep turning this. You don't need to have that. You could potentially, like a lot of times I see people who work this way, maybe put it on a piece of newspaper and just kind of like rotate the newspaper around as they're building. So that's going to be up to you. A lot of people might start out on the banding wheel and decide that they don't want to do that.
Want like a wood one?
Yeah, that'll work fine.
Okay,
now this wood one will be fine. Thank you. Okay, so Also want everybody to build on a piece of wood. I'm gonna make sure that we have enough smaller pieces that will fit on the banding wheels, so that we're not working on a piece of wood like this. We want to do a smaller piece that's not much bigger, but a little bit bigger than the base that we're putting on. Okay, that way we can easily pick it up and move it and do that sort of stuff. But I don't want you building right on top of the banding wheel, because you're gonna have to cut it off each time and put it on. So I want you to build on a piece of wood that we can kind of keep doing this. The other thing, now that we have this lined out, notice how thick it is, right? I've got a generous amount of material. I'm just gonna kind of cut right into this thing. Just kind of spin this around, there we go. This, like these fatter blades like this, is gonna kind of squish the material out. That's okay, I'm just trying to get it rough. I can always kind of come back in and dial it in later. One other thing that I like to do once I get this. Okay. Looking outside, so I don't want to cover this up. So now I have the base, right? It's pretty good, pretty even. I can come back in and kind of just taper this in a little bit if I want to. I'm going to start building right off of this. I'm just kind of using this as a reference. We can see that lines up perfectly with this template. So this is what we're actually going to be using. We're going to be coming through here and starting to build. This is going to be the start of my piece. So as I start to build coils, it's going to build right up and around. Okay. So when you're building, we're going to start going through how to build with this. I'm not going to do as much of that today. Some things I want you to remember as you're building with this is that we're not doing this, right? As we're starting to add coils, we're not doing this. We're trying to keep this as flat as possible, and that's why I wanted you all to make sure we had a nice flat bottom. So this is going to line up here. We're going to start to build coils in the thing and pinch up and use this as our template that goes all the way around as we start to build, so we can make sure everything stays nice and even. Okay? So we have our first little bit down. The other thing I like to do is just kind of trace out with like a marker or something and trace it right on the wood. And then pick one spot and just kind of line it up. Maybe two spots, whatever you feel best. Two spots works well. So I have this, like, these two little spaces right here. Then I'll just like make a little mark here. And once I build up, I can put this in. I won't be touching the bottom too much. So if this slides around for some reason, or something happens and it falls, I can always take this and set it right back on, and I can just keep it nice and square. I can keep it nice and lined up. This isn't necessary. I know a lot of people that don't do this. I just like to do it for my own kind of sense of mind too as well. Okay, so now that I've got this set up, I can let this start to tighten up a little bit. Now we're going to start rolling out coils. Wow, just this sitting out just for that time. Stiffened up quite a bit. Okay, so coils. This is just kind of, this is something like, I like to equate it to learning how to wedge. Like, it's going to take you a long time before you really understand. I don't know how many of you have tried to start rolling coils yet with this last project, but it's not an easy thing to do. So the first thing I want you to do is just start kind of working the material into like a snake-like shape. Make sure your clay isn't too hard, it's just going to crack. What I'm doing here is I'm squeezing it with both hands, but I'm turning it as well. Now I notice like some thick spots here, some thinner spots all through here. I'm working it into the working the thick spots to the thin spots. Just like if you were to be rolling a slab, flip this over maybe. Once again, I'm starting to kind of just open it up. This is drier clay. I just got it from underneath there, and it's starting to crack a little, but I think it will be fine for the demo. So starting off with this like snake-like coil, and then from here we're going to start moving it along. So it's really important when you're rolling a coil that you're not pushing down super hard, and otherwise, as you're pushing and moving this way, you're just going to squish it. It's just going to flatten out. The goal is to try to keep it around all the way around the coil. I know it sounds easy, but it's the first thing that's going to happen is this thing's going to want to flatten out, and then you're going to get this like more like a strap of leather and not like coil or rope. Okay. So what I like to do is I start from the middle and just slowly push and make sure it rotates all the way around, and then bring it back. And see how I kind of like let it go, and now I'm slowly starting to move it out towards the ends. Move it back into the middle, move it out, and I'm pushing with all of my hands, from my fingers all the way down to the base of my hands. I'm just starting to move, and I can flip it every now and again, trying to move the thick to the thin. As it starts to get a little bigger, sometimes using one hand back here to kind of keep it level. And then sometimes we can see how it's starting to flatten here on this side here. Can you all see that? Flattening right here a little bit slightly. I'll roll it up on that edge and then slowly kind of wiggle that down. So I'm trying to basically just round that side off. And then back up. There's really no, I mean, sometimes it depends on the coils that you want to make. Some people like to roll smaller, skinnier coils. Some people like to roll slightly bigger ones. The small, I'd say a good rule is about the width of your thumb, or the diameter of your thumb. About that kind of fatness is going to be perfect. But you can notice there's some thick spots, some thin spots. I'm trying to even this thing out as much as I possibly can. If you work this too long, especially if you're working on a wooden board, you're going to start to get these cracks that are happening. This is just a drier piece of clay. If you guys have a wetter clay right out of the bag, it should be better. And if I try to bend this and start to move this, it's just going to crack on me. So you just need to be careful that your stuff's not getting too dry. It shouldn't take you very long to roll out a coil. What I like to do, if this is getting long, you can just go ahead and kind of just cut it in half. Before you start working, I think it's a good practice to, the same thing would happen when you start to learn how to throw on the wheel, is you'd wedge, and cut like 10 balls of clay instead of just one, then mess up, and then you'll have to go wedge another and weigh another and do all that kind of stuff. It's good practice to have a bunch of these ready to go. So I would say try to roll out like 8 to 10 of these. Keep them under plastic and then start building. You'll be able to build a lot quicker. You'll get better at it because you'll be doing quite a bit more. So you want something like this. This is kind of where you want it. Okay. You might have more delicate areas potentially, like maybe here or up here, where it might require maybe a smaller coil or something like that. So what I want you to do as you're rolling stuff out is have a thing of plastic ready to go and start laying your coils. See, this one's starting to flatten out pretty good here, so I'll roll it up on the edge and just kind of flatten it back down. This is another one, the great thing to remember about technique really kind of working itself out here. It's just going to take you practice getting this. I mean, once you get it, you'll start to fly. If they're a little flat, that's okay. Don't worry about, try to get it as nice as possible, but if it starts to get a little flat and that sort of stuff, that's fine too. So just keep making them. It's pretty wet in there. That's pretty dry, the top part of this clay. Once again, see, I'm kind of just moving this thing through my hands. Difficult processes within ceramics. In my opinion, I think it's a little bit more difficult than throwing on the wheel. But we get the hang of it. Okay. So, got this coil. Start to think about attaching that first piece. You want to start your piece off starting with a pretty strong foundation. So those of you who have maybe a more intricate form, something like this form is going to be, the strength is going to be built right out, right, and held right in this area. So I'm not really as worried, but some people have like this, and then there's something like that where you're going to really want to make a nice substantial coil that's going to go along the base. But for this one, I'm just going to use a nice hefty kind of coil, and I'll be totally fine. So I'm going to slip and score really well. slip and score your coil as well. Be careful to not use too much moisture throughout here, too much water, but you're gonna start kind of smearing everything around as you start to build this thing up. The idea is to keep the joint where we're combining these two things wet, but not the whole other piece, okay? So now we're gonna start laying this around. I'm gonna lay it out right along the edge. I'm just gonna slowly start to work it around. As I'm working around, I'm slightly pushing down and squeezing a little bit at the same time. This is gonna roll right over the top. Forgot I had this thing here the whole time. This would have sucked cutting this part though. Use your X-Acto blade or a fettling knife for this, so now I'm gonna lay this right over the top. This is kind of an important part here. Lay this coil right over the top, and then I'm gonna come back and cut it, and that's gonna give me a nice, clean, even cut, and actually kind of measure for me. Slip and score this up. Now once we have this down, I'm gonna come back over and just like slowly start to kind of pinch. As I'm pinching it, I'm keeping it kind of inward at first, because I can always move it outwards. It's easier to move things outward than it is to move it in, okay? Once you start to really go, we start to kind of work up to this part here. If we get really far out, you can imagine how difficult that's gonna be to bring back in. If it's like in this way, we can pinch it and move it outward a lot easier, okay? So that's something important to remember. So I'm just gonna start off by, I'm pushing down, but I'm also pushing up slightly, moving around. You can see how it's a lot, I don't know, it looks easier on the banding wheel, but it might be easier for you just right off the table on a piece of paper or something. So that is good and secure, and it's round. I've kept this thing pretty round. You want to make sure that this stays as round as possible, and it's not all kind of crooked, and if it's getting a little crooked, then you'll know. Okay, so the next thing I like to do is kind of just come back in and just seal the seam. So I'm using the end of this, or your wooden knife, the big end of your wooden knife or something, to come back and just kind of seal that up. This is going to help really kind of marry this joint in here, but also when this thing starts to dry, it's not going to really give it a place to crack. Same will happen along the base. So what I like to do is actually use my thumb, and I push down. You guys see that as it comes around your way, how it's actually filling that space? And then those of you who are gotten really good at removing texture, doing that sort of stuff, this is the part where you're gonna get to come back and do some surgery. But I would build up a few times and then come back and do some editing if you need to, even the whole thing if we need to. So now I can come in and kind of use this tool. So it's also important to remember, as we're moving around, we need to make sure we're staying as even as possible too as well, right? We're not like looking at it like this. This is just important. We're not doing that. We're not doing this, right? I see people doing it all the time. They're like really trying to get it. Like it just looks so strange. I don't know what's going on, but they're putting it every single time. They're holding it like this. Try to hold it as flat as possible. Line it right up to the edge of your base, and now we can see that I need to come out, right? I need to come out quite a bit. Does everybody see that? So that's when I just come back here. I just start to kind of cheat this out a little bit. And I'm just pinching slightly to move this material. This is building a wall. This is simple coil construction, but still kind of pinch pot style that you all have already started to kind of work on. Now we're going to come back and see that I still have a little bit more. Go back through. It's actually really nice working out here. The clay is drying up quite a bit. Some of the things you're really going to need to be careful of here is that you're not building too much when it's too wet. Things are going to want to move. As it starts to alter, it's going to be really difficult to hold that form. Okay? So see how now I've started to get it. See how it's pretty close to my template here? So I'm going to work my way all the way around and make sure that my clay form is fitting the template. Okay, once again, I'm keeping my piece as flat as possible. And also make sure you're not like jamming this into your form, because that's going to throw everything else off too as well. Just let it rest along the base and then move your form out to it, okay? Next thing I would do, I'd probably put on 2 more coils or so, really seal them up and start to pinch them, leaving them slightly on the inside, and then hold my form up and then start to push them out to that too as well. It's important to remember that as we start to work up this curve here, as the curve starts to go outward, it's best to start to cheat your coil slightly to the outside, not a ton, but just a little bit to the outside of the top of your piece. Okay, does that make sense? The top that you're attaching to. As the curve starts to move back inwards, you do the opposite. So you'd actually cheat the coil slightly on the inside. So that's going to push. It's going to move your form like this. Okay, so you talk to any like professional master coil builders out there that make all of their work this way, and that's going to be their #1 rule is whatever direction you're going, you have to cheat the coil that way. If you want to bring it back in, you cheat it on the inside. If you want to bring it outside, you cheat it on the outside, okay? Always try to plan, though, to keep it just along the inside so that you can move your piece to the template, okay? The other thing I see all the time is as pieces just get too thin and too floppy, and they're too wet, and you're trying to attach something and something starts to fall on one end, and you're pushing it this way, and you get it perfect to this side, but this side's all kinds of messed up. So you just need to make sure that you're being careful with this. You're lining up your piece, you're doing that, and moving it all the way down. Remember that this isn't, I mean, we're going to get these really close. This isn't like slip casting where we're casting an exact replica or something like that where it's going to be perfect, or we're not, doing some sort of other hyper kind of mold formation or something like that. We're just doing a simple replication through a paper or a foam template. Okay, so it's okay if it's not exactly perfectly laser cut to the form, as long as it's within the boundaries. Okay. The other thing is I have this template part up here. I could have potentially just taken this right up. This just tells me where I need to stop, and then this will just be 1 coil probably all the way around to finish it. Does that make sense? Does this start to make a lot more sense, right, when I start to actually build it like this? I know a lot of people are like, I still just don't understand how this thing's going to come together. But as you start to build it, we can start to see. So this next one I'm going to build, I'll probably build 1, see how it looks, keep building. And this, I could probably build this thing. It'll take you guys longer, but I could, if I sat down next 2 hours, I could probably finish this form, maybe less, Just this form looks like there's some spots here that might fall, or there might be heavy here where it would warp or something like that. But I still think that this is a pretty strong form. If I'm letting the clay kind of set up and I'm working outside, I could whip this thing out no problem. It's just really important that you're checking often, okay? Checking with your template often, okay? Does anybody have any questions? No? Good? So the other thing I want you to remember is as you're building this thing, we're trying to keep the top even as we can too as well. So if it gets really off, if you have one spot that's like, and then a low dip, cut it even, cut it level, okay? As level as you can. And some of you are going to get to a point where you build and it's too wet to work on, you have to let it set up. It might still be 2 or 2.5 hours left of class. Just because you finish that doesn't mean it's, okay, well I'm done, I should probably leave now. I'm going to ask you to build another form, okay? So you're going to want to have at least 2 of these going at one time. So if you build and you get to a spot and it's wet, set this off to the side so it dries up, set another base, start building another one, all right? You're going to need to have at least 2 forms. One, because there's a good chance you could wreck something, you drop it, it could crack. This process is prone to cracking, so we're going to be on top of that. And then we're going to have 2 different surfaces going at one time too, okay? Does this make sense to everybody? Yeah? All right, so I'm going to go around and you can stop that now.